Panic in the woods is a name given to a mysterious force experienced by those far from civilization, such as hunters, campers, and hikers. Victims sense imminent danger, leading them to flee the area, often running blindly into the woods and becoming lost. Survivors claim they felt at the time they had to run, but upon regaining their sanity, they were completely lost. Many woods and wild places are credited with death by panic. The idea that someone out in nature can be suddenly overwhelmed by a seemingly uncaused and irrational terror. There are several possible explanations for this phenomenon: a psychological phenomenon, paranormal beings, magnetic fields, lack of oxygen, altitude sickness, or other natural influences that would cause disorientation and hallucinations. A strange variant of the high place phenomenon, also known as call of the void, which is the uncommon, strong urge of some mentally healthy people to suddenly jump from high places such as bridges or cliffs for no reason, or maybe an unconscious manifestation, perhaps similar to the wild man syndrome of New Guinea. The potential that lies in the heart of every individual, whether primitive or civilized, as his possible inability to come to terms with the world he is in, or maybe eating berries or mushrooms found in the woods that induce strange psychological reactions. People who have experienced panic in the woods call it the most primal fear imaginable, liking it to the closest they have ever came to death. The feeling only subsides when you start running and continue running a significant distance. Scary is probably the simplest way to describe it, but it's actually a lot more complex than the usual feeling of being scared. It's a feeling of fear, anxiety, and insecurity that spreads throughout your body seemingly from nowhere. Most people who have the misfortune of experiencing it say they experience an overwhelming feeling of not being welcome where they are. That only seems to subside when they leave. Some people don't just feel a sense of urgency, they also feel that panic is said tinnitus, or a feeling of dizziness. The entire wooded area seems to be affected by panic, the birds and animals becoming increasingly quiet as a lifeless mood seems to prevail. When a person experiences panic while walking their dog, the occurrence of this phenomenon also seems to make the dog anxious. It is not uncommon to hear of hikers being dragged by dogs out of areas where panic has begun to rampage. Some people also report that their dogs make a low growl or stand completely still as if they are hiding from something. For the most part, panic seems more about silence and fear than anything else. For a few, this phenomenon also associated with the telepathic message. A small percentage of hikers who experience panic report receiving messages in their heads from unknown sources, warning them not to turn back. Some people even have a mental image of a wild animal or a scary creature chasing them out of the forest. Sometimes one can see the shadow of a very tall person walking out of the trees. Other times it seems like a much more disturbing experience that makes them doubt their reality. There are multiple accounts of this happening. One person shares, "One sunny summer afternoon in 1953, my father and uncle were fishing on the rocks near Waterville, Ireland. Both were young veterans of World War II. My father was awarded for bravery more than once. At one point my uncle told me his line caught something underwater. As he tried to tug it free, he had the distinct feeling that something was holding it. A kind of horror began to creep over him, as if there was something intelligent and terrible hiding in the water. He looked at my father, who was already looking at him ghostly pale. They drew their lines in and ran for their lives, not stopping until they were back at their hotel. My supervisor at Cambridge, a scholar, had an experience similar to my father. As a teenager in 1915, he was fishing. Then, as he writes, an overpowering fear attacked me, utterly cold in quality and terrible because of its irrationality in that sunlit, lonely place. I remember that I dashed out of the water, up and out of the hollow, and ran, sweat-sodden, till after a mile or so I came within sight of a cottage. There was nothing following me. Author Joan Grant was staying with her husband Leslie at a shooting range in Scotland in August 1928. They were hiking the mountains. It was a beautiful autumn day, too hot for a high-intensity hike, so they settled for a leisurely walk. Nothing could be further from my mind than my fears, wrote Joan, when I was suddenly seized with such horror that I turned and ran down the trail in panic. Leslie ran after me and begged me to tell him what was wrong. I could only spare enough breath to tell him to run faster and faster. Something utterly wicked, four-legged, and yet obscenely human, invisible, and yet solid enough to hear the tap of its hooves tried to reach me. If that happened, I would have to die because I was too scared to know how to defend myself. I had to run about half a mile when I broke through an invisible barrier behind which I was safe. A few years later, a local doctor told Joan that to her horror, 2 hikers had been found deceased in the exact same spot. Both men were under 30. The weather was good. They spent a pleasant night camping in the mountains. As they wrote in their journal that was found with them, they were found within 100 yards of each other, face down, sprawled out as if they had fallen from a great height. A doctor performed an autopsy on both men. Never in my life have I seen healthier corpses, he said. Not a thing wrong with either of the poor chaps, except that their hearts stopped. I put heart failure on the chip, but it is my considered opinion that they died of fright. John Buskin recounts how in 1910 he set out to climb a small peak in Germany. He was accompanied by a young forester named Sebastian. They had begun their climb at 2 in the morning and reached the summit around 9 in the morning. They had breakfast at a mountain inn before starting the 6-mile hike into the valley. It was a bright summer day that promised intense heat, but our route passed through shady pine forests and flower-filled meadows. I noticed my companion had fallen silent and looked at him. I was surprised to see his face pale, sweat beading on his forehead, and his eyes looking forward as if he was in agony from fear, as if terror surrounded him to such an extent that he did not dare to look to the side. Suddenly he started running, and I ran too, with a force that was cultivated within me. Terror also seized me, but I did not know what I was afraid of. It's like a laughter epidemic attacking children who don't want to laugh. We ran like crazy, rushing through the gaps, jumping off rocks, through bushes, crashing into trees, sometimes into each other. And all the while, we never made a sound. Finally, we walked along the bushy valley road, where we lay for a while completely exhausted. We didn't talk all the way home. We didn't even dare to look at each other. What was that about, I wondered. I'll guess it's panic. Sebastian saw the goat-foot god or something like that. According to the last people to see him, this phenomenon happened to Terrence Woods in the moments before he disappeared. They had just finished filming and prepared for the day when Terrence, who others said had been unusually quiet for several hours, approached a strip of land away from the group, who was walking steeply down a hill towards the woods below a little bit. He stood there for a moment, and then, to everyone's surprise, without saying a word, he dropped the two-way radio he was holding and took off at full speed. He crossed the ridge, went down the hill, and still at a frantic pace ran into the dense forest at the bottom of the hill and disappeared. Everything happened so quickly that the rest of the group did not have time to pull themselves together and react until Terrence disappeared into the trees. At first they thought it was a joke, so they called him but didn't see him return, so they went looking for him. But it was getting dark and starting to freeze. They thought he might have gone to the main road on the other side of the woods, so the group drove around looking for him. As there was no sign of Terrence anywhere, they reported him missing, and a search was launched, then called off that night as the weather worsened. Since that day, there has been no trace of Terrence Woods. Searches found nothing. Although the forest he ran through was vast, and there was no guarantee that he ran straight towards the road, he could have turned in any direction, and there were many areas that could hide his remains. No one was found to have a motive to harm him. No one can explain what made him take off running. The police have no clue.
It's all. I don't wish this on anyone.
This year marks 4 years since Terrence Woods Sr. of Maryland last saw his son, Terrence Woods Jr., who was 27 at the time.
All these reckless stories, he had a mental breakdown. They stated that he went to grab a drone out the sky. He says he's going to use the bathroom and leaps off a cliff. If he had a mental breakdown, how do you know he had a mental breakdown? And if he had a mental breakdown, how can you say he don't want to be found?
Terrence Woods Jr. worked as a film producer, and at the time of his disappearance, he was working on the Discovery show Gold Rush with London-based production company Raw TV. The film crew of 12 men, all white except for Woods, were filming in the Nez Perce National Forest in Oro Grande, Idaho. The forest is a vast 4 million acres of mostly wilderness. Woods says so far he hasn't received much help or given solid answers as to exactly what happened to his son.
The only person that was there was the person Simon G. That was one of the producers. They told me that him and my son didn't get along. The sheriff told me that.
The Idaho County Sheriff's Office confirmed the case is still active, but had no further details on exactly what happened. Raw TV said in part, Terrence went missing in a remote, densely wooded and mountainous area in Idaho that was particularly challenging to search. From the outset, our location team was actively involved in the search for Terrence, and we put a great deal of effort and resource into trying to locate him. However, Woods Sr. doubts Raw TV's efforts to locate his son. Perhaps the most frustrating part to his predicament he finds himself in? The endless cycle of no clear answers from the parties involved as to exactly what happened to Terrence Woods Jr.
Telling the story anonymously on the internet, a woman and her husband noticed that one day their cat ran into the woods. They chased the cat and called it. The cat kept meowing, urging them to go deeper and deeper into the forest. Finally, they began to wonder how their cat could travel so many miles through the forest in such short time. The cat's meowing suddenly stopped and panic began. They decided to turn around and run home. The cat they were chasing was waiting for them near the garden gate, suggesting that something was mimicking its voice to lure them into the forest. This story seems to be of someone getting lost in the woods and panicked, which is different from this phenomenon of being panicked for no reason, though it is still a closely related and interesting case that I would like to share. In October 2015, a forest surveyor working in an area of dense woodland near Mount Redington in Maine came across a collapsed tent hidden in the undergrowth. He noticed a backpack, some clothes, a sleeping bag. Inside it was what he believed to be a human skull. He took pictures and rushed out of the woods to call his boss. News quickly reached Kevin Adam, search and rescue coordinator for the Maine administration, who immediately guessed what the surveyor had found. He wrote, "From what I could see of the location on the map and what I saw in the photo, I was almost certain it would be Geraldine Largay. A 66-year-old retired nurse from Tennessee went missing near Reddington in July 2013 while attempting to hike the Appalachian Trail, a national hiking route that extends for more than 2,000 miles. Her disappearance sparked one of the largest search and rescue operations in state history. For 2 years, investigation failed to uncover any clues until surveyors stumbled upon her camp. No one knew anything about what happened to her. It was Jerry's dream trip. She left with a friend, Jane Lee, on April 23rd. That's yesterday. I'm filming this April 24th, 2013. From Harper's Ferry, West Virginia, they planned to hike north to, then back to Harper's Ferry, continuing south. They had help from Jerry's husband, George, who checked on them in his car, resupplied them at prearranged locations, and occasionally took them to a hotel to rest. They made good progress, and by the end of June, they were in New Hampshire. A family emergency forced Jane to return home, but Jerry continued alone. She hiked slowly, moving about a mile an hour. Her sense of direction is not good, but she was well equipped. She was a meticulous planner. She always knew where to find water and shelter, and her warm, sociable nature gained her many friends among other hikers. One of them, Dorothy Rust, told the Boston Globe she was so full of confidence and joy. It was a pleasure to talk to her. Dorothy and her hiking companion, who were headed south, met Jerry at a shelter just south of where Jerry disappeared. They were the last people to see her alive. Around 6 a.m. on the morning of July 30th, they found her packing her things up, eating breakfast, and carrying her backpack. Dorothy took her photo. With this, investigators knew what she was wearing when she went missing, which is typically useful information in missing persons cases. A blue scarf, red long-sleeve shirt, beige shorts, hiking boots, blue backpack, distinctive gloves, and a big smile. She looks ready and enthusiastic to continue her hike. 45 minutes after leaving the shelter, Jerry texted George to tell him she was on her way. They arranged to meet the next evening at a railroad crossing 21 miles up the trail. The first time anyone knew something was wrong was when she didn't show up for the meeting. George waited a day, then alerted security service, who went through their carefully prepared procedure in case anyone got lost. Over the next few weeks, hundreds of professional rescue workers and trained volunteers searched the woods in the area. They found nothing. There was no scrap of clothing, no sign of a camp. The investigation and many searches continued for the next 26 months until her body was found. Only then would they receive an answer. On August 6, Jerry used the phone for the last time. Although she continued to write in her diary for another 4 days, she knew what was going to happen. She left a message for her future rescuers. "When you find my body, call my husband George and my daughter Carrie. It will be the greatest kindness to them to know that I have passed away and where you find me. No matter how many years from now, please find it in your heart to mail the contents of this bag to one of them." She survived alone for at least 19 days in the wild before succumbing to effects of exposure and starving much longer than experts believed it was possible. Little did she know that a dog team had passed less than 100 yards from her, that her camp was only half a mile from the trail, or that if she walked downhill she would soon find an old railway that, if she followed, would in either direction lead her out of the woods. Most people feel unsettled at the slightest threat of being lost. It is dreadful. The extreme loneliness of the trail and the dread that follows when you use it instilled panic in Jerry. Instead of rationalizing how to get out of there, she made a camp and wrote a note for her finders. The terror of her situation had taken over her. Hello. Hello. Hi. See, we have a taker. You don't want it? That's my hand, ma'am. My hand. My hand. Hello. 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 There. Took you long enough. Don't want it. Maybe your friends will eat it. No? Made a mess. That one's been licking me. No, don't eat my hair, please. Oh. I wish I had something better to give him. Oh. You want scratches? Oh! You want kisses? There you go. There you go, sweet baby girl. Oh, oh. This one likes me. Here comes another. Oh, 10%. Other ladies are uninterested. I've cows so much. course, I wear flip-flops on a farm. Two baby cows. Should go back to filming now. They don't like the husks I brought them. I'm sure they'd probably prefer strawberries or something, but that's what I had. Anyway. Probably got enough footage of cows and can go back to filming. Thank you for visiting me, ladies. Thank you. Thank you.